Facts speak for themselves. India is a democracy. We can't hide the facts. We report the facts. The military most certainly doesn't have a choice in the matter because these are the facts based on what happened on the ground, and we've gotten them directly from Tawang. The Indian Army unit had advance intelligence about the possibility of an aggressive action from the Chinese side. Very, very important. The Indian Army had pre-deployed troops on the lower ridges is something that we've been able to confirm. About 300 odd Chinese troops had arrived in that particular area, and immediately after they ran into the Indian deployment there was verbal abuse which quickly escalated into violent stone pelting, which we also saw in Galwan, remember, and then there were fisticuffs. People started punching each other and beating each other up. The Indian troops then rapidly summoned reinforcements to that area. They were fully prepared already, and these reinforcements totally surrounded the Chinese patrol party of about 50 men, backed up by another 150 men. Indian reinforcements completely surrounded them and pounced on them because the stone pelting was continuing. They pounced on them, totally overwhelmed them in two pockets. Chinese soldiers were beaten up really, really badly. Many injuries were sustained in this phase of the clash. This is when the Chinese troops realized that they were being completely overpowered and outnumbered, and they began to retreat like all a military would do that in this particular situation, especially China. Indian troops chased the Chinese troops back across the border, a disputed border, and in this particular point, remember, the Chinese Defense Ministry is correct, because yes, the Indian side did cross the border, except it wasn't illegally. It was to chase these intruders out. We are told, a very important piece of information, some Chinese soldiers were actually captured as part of the skirmish, during that grand retreat by the Chinese forces, but they were released after a couple of hours. A group of about 50 Indian Army troops aggressively approached the Chinese post on their side, and so unnerved and panicked was the Chinese post, we are told, that they started firing shots in the air, which is something that almost never happens in such a situation, but so threatened were they by the Indian side that they fired shots in the air. The Indian side then used loudspeakers, both sides used loudspeakers to communicate with each other. Warnings were issued by the Indian side to the effect that if you ever try something like this again, we won't stop here the next time. We will go probably even further than this. Take a look at the full picture. 17 steps of what happened in Tawang. The full picture only on India Today. Watch this story. 9th December 2022, the India-China clash in Yangtze Tawang in Arunachal Pradesh. But this time, bully Beijing was schooled with full aggression. Overwhelmed and overpowered, the Chinese were chased away after a 25-minute clash. India Today has the full picture, the 17 steps of what actually happened. This time, the Indian Army had ground intelligence about a possible escalation attempt from the Chinese side, and so it had pre-deployed troops on lower ridge lines of the mountain feature. After 300 Chinese troops intruded and arrived, verbal abuse escalated to stone pelting and fisticuffs, but an alert Indian Army surprised the intruders. Indian troops rapidly summoned reinforcements that immediately surrounded and pounced on the Chinese. In at least two pockets, Chinese soldiers were beaten up badly and they began to retreat. Indian troops chased the Chinese troops. Some Chinese were even temporarily captured. A group of about 50 Indian Army troops then aggressively approached the Chinese post, after which the Chinese fired warning shots in the air, totally unnerved. Indian troops stayed put on the Chinese side as a show of force and issued a warning, after which they returned back to the Indian side. The PLA troops were sent marching into misery by the Indian Army. At least 5 Chinese soldiers are said to have been held captive temporarily and later released during the skirmish. More Chinese soldiers had been injured in the Tawang clash, while Indian soldiers suffered minor injuries, including a wrist fracture. But one thing is absolutely clear: India taught a sharp, aggressive lesson this time to China. With Gaurav Sawant in Tawang, Arunachal Pradesh, Bureau Report, India Today.